All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the St. Louis Association of Realtors Residential Sale Contract Training. Thanks, everybody, for being on. I know these trainings aren't always the most fun, but what I would say is they're the most necessary. There are so many realtors that are years into their career that have never sat down and taken the time to read the sale contract. They don't understand it. They don't know how to interpret it. They just know where to fill the blanks in. And when we do that, we're setting ourselves up, our clients up, everybody up for a potential disaster because we don't understand what it is that our clients are signing and that we're signing as well. Keep in mind, when you write a sale contract, you write your name on the contract also. Your name is on there. You're signing it. You are liable for what you're putting in here. So the sale contract is extremely important to understand it, to know how to interpret it, to know how to explain it to a potential buyer and seller as well. You need to know the clauses in there that protect them. You need to know ways that they could potentially get stuck. All of these things are extremely important. I mean, look at this contract. It's been written over the years. Think of it as a bunch of like battle scars in a sense from people that have made mistakes and that gets added in. These are written by attorneys. When I started 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago now in real estate, I think our contract was 4 pages. I think it was a carbon copy, white, yellow, pink. You had to handwrite it. There was no e-signatures or any of that back then. You had a fax machine. That was cool. You could fax it to a client if they had one. But usually you were taking these and meeting your client and getting them hand signed. I'm dating myself, but that's how it was 20 years ago. Things have advanced. But in addition to that, the contract has gotten a lot longer as well. So I'm curious if anybody's been on, anybody on right now. I'm looking to see. Good morning, Kat, Nicole. Good morning, Leo. Do you remember how many pages the contract was about 20 years ago? Or maybe even when you started, how many pages was the contract? Today it's 9 on the residential SLAR sale contract that we're going to cover today. Let's get into it, though. So let's get into this contract. We're going to go line by line. We're going to talk through it because I want everybody on this call to really understand what this contract states, why it's important, and how we can best protect our clients. And Nancy says, I think it was 6. Yeah, you might be right there, Nancy. 6 potentially. Yeah, so they've added 3 pages. I mean, it's added a lot. I think you are right. Maybe instead of 4, it was 6. So we've added a lot. And thank you for that, Nancy, and good morning. So let's go through it, though. We're going to go line by line. So we're starting with the date. That's an obvious one. You put the date in, right? Line 2, then, parties and property, lines 1 and 2. What I'd like to do is you're going to put your buyer's name here. We're going to write this contract from the standpoint of we are representing the buyer. So what I recommend is putting their middle initial always. And the reason for that, and if they're married, I put in parentheses a married couple. The reason I do that is because for my example here, John Smith and Mary Smith, that is a super common name. And there are probably thousands and thousands of John and Mary Smiths out there. So I want to put their middle initial because that's going to help the title company when they have to do the title search and start doing this. So what's going to happen there, and the lender as well, what happens there is if they have their middle initial, let's just say they run a title search on, for John Smith, right? There's tons of them. Put the middle initial there. It's going to help the lender. It's going to help the title company, especially on the sales side as well. So they're not like, hey, there's liens or this or that on the property. So even when you're representing your sellers, make sure you put the middle initial. I think that's very important. It will help. So I'm putting that John C. Smith and Mary A. Smith, a married couple, in parentheses. It's letting my title company, my lender, everybody know that they're married. They are a married couple. If they're not married, obviously don't put a married couple. They're 2 individuals buying a property together. They agree to purchase from the undersigned seller the following real property in the municipality of. So I'm going to put the municipality, whatever it is. My example here, I just put Baldwin. Keep in mind, I just made up an address. That's okay. Baldwin is the municipality. It's a municipality in St. Louis, and it's in the county of St. Louis. So I'm filling all of these things out. And then I'm putting the address. I'm putting the complete address. 123 Main Street, Baldwin, Missouri, 63021. Put the entire address, the zip code, all of it. Don't just put 123 Main Street. Put Baldwin, Missouri, 63021. All of that. So pretty self-explanatory, pretty easy, right? Now let's move into the inclusions. The reason I'm going over this is because we see this a lot, though, where people just put 123 Main Street and they leave off the municipality, they leave off the state, they leave off the zip code. Common sense, I know, but it does happen. So don't miss that. Write this out in full. This is a legal document. Make sure you're taking the time to fill it out. Now, inclusions and exclusions, what's included in the property and what's excluded in the property. Here is an important note. This contract, not the seller's disclosure statement, the MLS or other promotional material, provides for what is to be included in this sale. To avoid any misunderstanding, the parties are urged to list as included or excluded any items which may be subject to question or unclear as to being considered a fixture, such as electronic equipment. The purchase price includes all existing improvements to the property and appurtenances, fixtures, and equipment which seller guarantees to own free and clear, including. So first line there, line 7, this contract, not the seller's disclosure statement or the MLS. So this happens a lot. In the seller's disclosure statement, it says something, there's something in there that not even a stain, but it just says it has something, right? And then the MLS as well. Well, if we intend and we want that, like the something that's maybe not like a shed, right? A shed can go, maybe it's a permanent fixture, maybe it's not. It's up for interpretation a lot of times. If your client wants the shed in the back, make sure you write it in the contract. Just make sure it goes in there. If they want other things that are in the yard, the swing set maybe. I mean, that could be considered a permanent fixture, maybe not, right? When in doubt, write it out. Write it in the contract, anything you want to stay. Now, what I would also say is you have to be really careful with the lender about too much personal property. Like if we're like, hey, all of the theater chairs to stay, which is pretty normal, washer and dryer to stay, the kitchen refrigerator, all of the pool equipment, all of the pool chairs, the umbrellas, all of this, we might need to start looking at somewhat of a bill of sale because the lender might have an issue with that much personal property into, if we start adding in furniture, the couches to stay, the dining room table, things like that. We can't add a ton of personal property into our sale contract. It will skew appraisal price in a sense with the lender, but normal things are going to be things like this. So there's a list of inclusions here. So let's just look at it. Access to property, all keys, remote controls, garage door openers, exterior lighting and landscaping, mailbox, invisible pet fence systems. That's one that people sometimes take those little pet collars. Those are supposed to stay. It's in the contract. So if the house doesn't have these things, of course, it's not staying. The house doesn't have it. This is stating that if the home does have any of these things, they are staying. So what I would encourage you all to do is read through this. A big one that happens a lot is the window wall related. Let's look at that. Curtain/drapery hardware only. Blinds, shades, shutters, and awnings. So if they have blinds on their house in the windows, the blinds, like say they have those faux wood blinds or plantation shutters, those are installed, those stay. Now, if they have curtains or drapery, the rods have to stay, but the actual physical material itself does not. So if your client's like, oh my gosh, there's this 2-story great room and there's these long 20-foot curtains or draperies in there and they love them, write that in because those are not staying if you don't write it in the contract. The hardware, the bars up at the top are staying, but if they want that drapery to stay, you have to write it in the contract. Attached mirrors and all bathroom mirrors, that stays as well. So let's just say your seller put this really nice mirror in their powder room and they absolutely love it and they don't want it to stay. I would recommend having them take that out ahead of time and replace it with a different mirror. The same is true. It is supposed to stay in the contract. So if reading right there, attached mirrors and all bathroom mirrors are supposed to stay. HVAC system, a big one too that used to get missed a lot. We don't see it much anymore though, is under the electrical lighting and TV related. Attached TV mounts only. The TVs do not stay, only the TV mount stays. So the bracket on the wall, do not take those off. Let your sellers know ahead of time. TV can go with you if they weren't asked for in the contract. Sometimes sellers will ask for TVs to stay. TV is not a required item to stay. The mount mounted to the wall is a required item to stay. So what I would recommend everybody doing is taking some time to read through this and understand what everything in here says. So you know what is staying with the property if the home does have it. In addition to that, you can write things in. So line 28, I wrote in all kitchen appliances as shown, including refrigerator. So if you look at the kitchen cooking related up here, we have dishwasher and trash compactor. So if the house had a trash compactor and a dishwasher, it is required to stay. Ovens, ranges, stoves, and attachments, built-in microwave ovens, attached gas fire barbecues. Remember those old, like you see it on city houses sometimes, they still have like a built-in gas fireplace in the backyard. That would be required to stay. What it doesn't stay, though, is your refrigerator. So many buyers ask for the refrigerator to stay. They also ask for the washer and dryer to stay. So if they intend to want that, write it in the contract. Don't assume that in the MLS it said, or in the seller's disclosure, it said these things to stay, but then we don't ask for it in the contract. And then we come back later and say, oh, well, your seller's disclosure said the washer and dryer was staying. Well, read line 7 again. The contract, not the seller's disclosure statement, the MLS or other promotional material, provide what is to be intended in the sale. It has to be in the sale contract. So don't rely on a secondary source to say, oh yeah, they're going to leave that. Or maybe the agent said, yeah, they're going to leave that. They don't want to take it with them. You don't write it in the contract. And now the seller says, well, they didn't ask for it, did they? I know we said we would leave it, but they didn't ask for it. So let's go ahead and sell it. Now you go do your walkthrough, the washer and dryer is gone. You're like, hey, where is it? You said it was going to stay. Well, you didn't ask for it in the contract. So we assumed you didn't want it. And then we're stuck. And then we're maybe buying a new washer and dryer for our buyer. So write it in the contract. I can't emphasize that enough. Extremely important. Write it in the contract. Exclusions. What would be an example of something excluded? Maybe there's a hot tub in the backyard that no longer works and it's just sitting there. We want to make sure that's gone. We don't have to worry about getting it hauled away. Or there's a dilapidated shed in the back that we don't want to worry about having that hauled away at some point. So we would write that in the contract for those things to be removed prior to closing. That way it's the seller's responsibility. They don't leave it there for you to handle it later. So hopefully that's clear. Again, if you have questions on here, if you want to jump up here with me and ask your question live, just drop a comment. We'll get you a link, pull you up here, talk through any questions that you may have. Would love some participation. So yeah, if you have questions, please let me know. All right, let's move on to the purchase price. So line 33 is easy. Purchase price, $400,000. Whatever the offer price is that you're offering goes there. Lines 34 and 35, this is where it gets a little bit confusing for some people because of the added buyer broker compensation. So lines 34 and 35, I want you to think of this as a closing cost that your buyer is going to use for their closing cost on the home, not for compensation to pay you. So think of this solely as 34 and 35 are lines for your buyers if they need closing costs to get the loan done. So if they did, in this scenario, I put 0, saying my buyers didn't need any. But if they did, if the lender's like, hey, they really need 3% closing cost in order to get the loan, you would put in there either a flat fee amount or more likely a percentage on line 34, and it would say something to the effect of 3% of the purchase price shall be credited by seller at closing toward buyer's closing cost, prepaids, points, buyer's broker compensation, and all other fees allowed by lender. This is where agents get tripped up a little bit, is they think that we have to put that there to get our compensation as a buyer. If the buyer wants to ask the seller to pay our agent compensation, you do not. You put that on line 41 right below, which we'll get into in a moment. So lines 34 and 35 would be if the buyer needs closing costs for things like their lender fees, their appraisal, their survey, title, inspections, things of that nature. That percent is going to go on 34 and 35. And that's why it's important to have a conversation with their lender as well to see if closing costs are a necessary element in order for them to get the deal done. So a lender might say, hey, things are a little tight. They really need some closing costs. Try to get at least 3%. That's what they're going to need in order to get this done. We would write that in line 34 there. Now, 36, earnest money. Good rule of thumb, 1% of the purchase price for earnest money. So in this scenario, I put a $400,000 purchase price. 1% is $4,000. So I put my earnest money there and I check the box to be delivered to, and I insert my title company. Global Title is our in-house title company. Again, you can use whichever title company you prefer. That is the title company I use. But I would then say to be delivered to Global Title, escrow agent within, and there's a 5-day default if none stated. Now, what you're going to see in this contract is a lot of if none stated, right, where you can choose to leave it blank. My rule of thumb for writing offers has always been I fill everything out. I fill every line out. The reason for that is because if I don't fill it out and I send it to the client, they're going to ask. They're going to say, hey, I see this isn't filled out, but it does say 5 days if none stated. It's just more questions, right? So I like to fill every line out, even if there's a none stated. If I'm going to put, even if it's the same, 5 days if none stated, I still put 5 there. That way they don't think, my client doesn't think I missed it. And I just feel it's good practice to go through every single line to make sure you're not missing anything. Mistakes do happen. At this point in my career, I can write a sale contract in a few minutes. For somebody new, it might take an hour, right? And that's okay. But I still double and triple check every single contract I write because mistakes do happen. So I'm going to put my earnest money there. And now what's going to happen is I need to let my title company know right away that we have an offer accepted if this offer were to be accepted. And then there are things like trust funds and online ways now where you can get your client can send earnest money to the title company. But essentially, we have 5 days for your client to get that earnest money to the title company to stay in contract. So line 39 and 40, no additional earnest money. So in this scenario, I put NA. There's no additional earnest money being delivered. What would be a scenario for additional earnest money? Well, maybe, I don't know, if you wanted to sweeten the deal and say, hey, we'll add some additional earnest money. We have a longer delayed closing. So after we get through inspections or whatnot, maybe we add earnest money. You can do that. Most of the time, we don't see this happen, though. So you would put NA there. Now, line 41, this is a big one. This now is how our compensation. So, in St. Louis, on our listing contracts, there's no longer shared compensation. You go on your listing appointment, you get your listing percentage that you want. I want my listing, the fee, investment in my service to represent you as a seller and get your home sold is 3.3%. There is no compensation where we're giving compensation to the buyer agent any longer like we did in the past. So what line 41 is stating is the buyer is requesting that the seller pay compensation to buyer's broker, to us, at closing per the terms of the attached broker compensation rider, Form 2109, and or any other compensation agreement. This is in addition to any credit at closing listed above. So again, this is in addition. So 41, if I asked for 3% if the buyer, is asking for 3%. Let's say I met with my buyer. I said, I charge 3% to represent you. That's a fee that you incur. But most of the time we can get the seller to cover that. So ultimately it's the buyer's responsibility. And what we're going to do when we present the offer is we're going to ask for the seller to cover that. So line 41 is the buyer is asking the seller to cover that 3% fee that's owed to me as the buying broker. Now, keep in mind here, this is in addition to any credit listed above. So if I asked for 3% here, right, if the buyer asked for 3% and we check this box and they're asking for 3%, that is a total of 6%. They're asking for a 3% seller closing cost toward their closing cost, and they're asking for 3% to cover my fee as their buyer agent. So just keep that in mind. It's not like, hey, it's 3 here and then not 3 here. It's 6%. It's 3 here and 3 here. But for the purpose of this conversation, I put 0 here. So we're not asking, the buyer's not asking for any closing costs for their loan, but they are asking for, on the broker compensation rider, to cover my fee, which is 3% for example's sake here. So make sure you check this box. Extremely important if your buyer wants the seller to cover how much they owe you in their buyer agency agreement. I hope that makes sense. I hope that's clear. But this is an important box to make sure this is checked, because if not, if you leave this unchecked and you submit this offer and the buyer signed a 3% buyer agency agreement with you, they owe you that $12,000, that 3% now. So they're going to have to pay for that. So most of the time, most buyers are asking the seller to cover that by checking this box and attaching that rider. Now, keep in mind, that's always negotiable. The seller can counter back. That's a negotiation. So just because you're asking for it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get it. It is negotiable. So 43, 44, 45, total purchase price, including the adjustments set forth in this contract, less any amount of seller financing or seller's loan being assumed as stipulated in the contract, if applicable, can't talk, is to be paid at closing by cashier's check, wire transfer, or any form acceptable to closing agent. That means when at the closing table, typically your client is going to need to, any proceeds they are bringing to the table, the amount, maybe their down payment or whatnot, needs to be in the form of a cashier's check or wire transfer. Again, get with your title company to know those things ahead of time. All right. So if any questions, again, please drop it in. I know this stuff's kind of boring, but again, it's important. That's why we do it. Method of financing. So you have two options here, not contingent on financing and contingent upon financing. For the purpose of this conversation, we talked about contingent on financing. Very, very, very important clause in the contract here. And line 53, that date is extremely important. That is your loan commitment date. So I'm going to read a couple lines real quick. Buyer agrees, line 49, contingent upon financing. Buyer agrees to do all things necessary, including but not limited to the execution of a loan application and other instruments, the payment to the lender of the credit report, appraisal, and any other required fees, and to otherwise cooperate fully in order to obtain the financing described below. If buyer does not deliver written notice provided by buyer's lender to seller or listing broker of buyer's inability to obtain the loan approval on the terms described below on or before this date. So you can see it's defaulted to 30 days after the acceptance deadline. I went ahead and put an official date in. I, again, like to put an official date in. I put roughly 30 days out. That is my loan contingency date. So what does that mean? That means that if we, let's just say the lender's like, hey, let's wait to get through inspections before we order appraisal, and the lender's pushing some things off, or your client, maybe this happens a lot too. Your client's not getting the documents to the lender that the lender needs, and we come up on this 6/11 date, and this date passes, and now we wake up tomorrow and it's June 12th. We have now missed our loan commitment date, which means our buyer becomes a cash buyer. So we have totally put our buyer in a horrible spot to where they are stuck now. And if they, for some reason, cannot get the loan, they're stuck in this and they're a cash buyer. So the loan commitment date is a date you will never want to miss. And what I have found with lenders over the years is that lenders don't fully understand what a loan commitment date is. They just don't. They don't understand our contract. They don't understand the importance of that date. So it's your responsibility as a buyer's agent to protect your buyer and to stay on the lender to make sure they hit this date. Hey, we have a loan commitment date of June 11th. It's extremely important that we have a loan commitment prior to this date. Please let me know if there are any issues with my buyer getting you documents. Please let me know as soon as the appraisal is ordered. Let me know when the appraisal comes back. Did it appraise out? All of these things are extremely important. So you are working with this lender. He or she is part of your team now to make sure they don't miss this date. They can't say, well, we're looking good. We don't have loan commitment yet, but there shouldn't be any issues. Don't worry about it. And if we come up on this date and they're saying on 6/11, they're saying, no, don't worry about it. We'll be good. And we miss that date. And then a day or two later, they're like, oh, we have a problem. Too late. So my advice would be, if we're seeing issues with this, like let's say a week before loan commitment, and we're having the lenders like, hey, they haven't got all the docs in yet, the appraisal hasn't even been ordered, whatever the case may be, you want to get an amendment and adjust and push this loan commitment date back to protect your buyer. So start talking with the listing agent, letting them know what's going on. But again, stay on with the lender. My rule of thumb is every week I'm calling the lender to get updates, letting them know, hey, we've ordered inspections. We're through inspections. Things are looking good. Is the appraisal ordered? When's the appraisal taking place? Do you need anything from my client? Do you need anything from me? Are they getting you information? Do you need anything from the title company? I'm here to facilitate as smooth of a transaction as possible. So I like to be very involved with all of my third-party vendors, meaning the lender, the title company, the inspector, all of that, because I want to make sure there's no holes, and I want to make sure we get to closing on time and we don't miss dates. So your loan contingency date, extremely important. If you miss this date, you now put your buyer in a spot where they're a cash buyer. Just keep that in mind. Terrible spot to be in. So if for some reason the lender says prior to the loan commitment date, they say, hey, we cannot get financing, the buyer lost their job. Hey, we can't, debt to income is too high, and we're before this June 11th date or whatever date is in your contract, they need to issue a denial letter to your buyer denying the loan that we would then send to the listing agent, and we would get buyer's earnest money to be returned. They're protected under this date. So if it's a legitimate reason that they are refused the loan, they are protected under this, and they would get their, and it says just right there. Let's read. If buyer has complied with terms of this paragraph and provided timely written notice to seller or listing broker of buyer's inability to obtain the loan approval then this contract shall be terminated with earnest money to be returned to buyer subject to paragraph 12. So very important. They can't just say, hey, we missed loan commitment. Lender, go deny the loan. That's loan fraud. Can't do that. So just keep that in mind. You can't just say, oh, just deny the loan now. We can't get financing. No, we can't do that. Lender has to have legitimate reasons for denying the loan. They can't just deny it for any reason. Again, note 61 through 64. Elsa says, can't hear me. If anybody else having a problem with that they can't hear me. No? Okay. I think everybody else is good, Elsa. Maybe check the settings on your end potentially. Not sure, but no one else. Yeah, everyone's saying we can hear you. So yeah, not sure. Check the settings also, please, on your computer. Okay. So if the loan, line 61 to 64, if the loan contingency date passes without written notice as outlined above, buyer remains obligated under this contract. Therefore, buyer should be certain that he will have the funds to close. If buyer's performance under this contract is to be independently conditioned upon the property appraising at a specific value, the buyer should complete and attach to this rider the appropriate appraisal rider, which we'll touch on that in a moment. So very important. I know I'm harping on this one a long time, but this is an extremely important date that gets missed all the time because agents don't understand the importance of it and their lender doesn't understand the importance of it. This will put your buyer in a horrible spot if you miss it. So, and then they can't get financing. So they become a cash buyer after this date passes if they do not have the loan commitment. So if your lender's hesitant, they're like, man, we should be fine, get an amendment and push it back. Well, we need certainty. We can't just go off of we'll be fine. So extremely important. So don't miss that date. This is one of the most important dates in your contract is your loan commitment date. Now let's look at the loan amount. So line 65, loan amount. For purposes of this conversation, I just put loan amount 90%. Where would you get this information? You're going to get it from the lender. The lender on the pre-approval letter is going to send the pre-approval letter, which you need, and I recommend you send the pre-approval letter with your offer, but it's going to have terms on it. Like, hey, they're putting 10% down. They're a conventional buyer. Or they're putting 3.5% down. They're an FHA buyer. Or they're putting no money down. They're a VA buyer. That is going to be on your pre-approval letter, and you're going to transfer those terms here. So for the purpose of this training, we're saying they're a conventional borrower, putting 10% down. And so I have loan amount 90%. They're getting a 90% loan. They're putting 10% down. Loan interest rate not to exceed, I put 6.75, and my amortization term is 30 years. So they're getting a 30-year loan. This is an important one too on 66 that most people don't understand. The initial interest rate not to exceed. So if I look at rates today and say they're 6.25, I generally will put on line 66 about 0.5 percentage point higher than what current rates are today. What that is doing is also protecting my buyer. Let's just say we put this house under contract today and the lender hasn't locked the rate yet. He doesn't lock the rate. We go into next week, and then the following week, the rate hasn't been locked yet, and rates shoot up to 7%. Now, all of a sudden, my borrower was pre-approved at 6.25%, and now rates are 7 or even 7.25. We have a massive rate spike. Now, all of a sudden, maybe the buyer cannot afford the house. Well, they're protected under this rate. So again, it has to be within the loan commitment, but because generally your lender is going to lock them in well before loan commitment. But if rates shoot way up, now all of a sudden my buyer maybe can't afford the house. Their payment has gone up significantly because we had a 1% increase in the rate. So they're protected now, and now they can get out of the contract and get a termination from the lender. So again, that's an important one. I recommend 0.5 percentage point higher than whatever the rate is today. So if rates are 6.25% today, I put 6.75%. And if rates shoot up higher than 6.75%, and that affects my buyer's ability to purchase a home, they're protected under this, and we can get a denial and get them out of the loan. So again, very, very important. And then amortization term, 30 years. Loan type, I check conventional and fixed rate. So again, fill that out and just keep that in mind with the interest rate not to exceed. That's an important number as well. I generally, as a rule of thumb, 0.5% higher than whatever the prevailing rate is today. So ask the lender, what are rates today? 6.25, great. I put in 6.75. Okay, Yeah, you've seen people put market rate as well. So if I were a seller, I would be a little hesitant on that because if rates won't go up, that could be a problem. So essentially what they're saying is market rate. My interpretation of that is whatever the rate is today, right? So I think we could look at that. Let me look into that a little bit, Lauren, and see like interpretation on that. Would market rate just be whatever the rates are at that time? There's been some subject to interpretation. Now, fortunately, we have not come across an issue with this. I'm curious if anybody on the call has, but we need to look and see like legally, and I don't know this, and I apologize, but I don't know definition of what market rate is. Is that whatever the rate is today? Or is that what, meaning that market rate is whatever the rate was today, and if it exceeds it all, then the buyer can get out? Or does market rate mean that whatever the rate is, like next week, if rates are 6.5, well, that's market rate. So yeah, good question. I'm gonna have to get back to you on that. I don't know the answer to that. I need to look and see legally what the definition of market rate would be when it comes to the residential sale contract. So very good question. We'll get an answer for everybody on that though, and we'll put it in the comments on Facebook, unless anybody knows the answer, and then that would be extremely helpful. If you do, let me know. So good question. Closing and possession. Okay, important one as well. All parties are encouraged to use the same title company to reduce risk. We know in Missouri that doesn't happen very often. It is beneficial in a lot of ways if they use the same title company. If the seller, because there's no like sharing figures back and forth and finalizing figures, same title company representing both sides, tends to be a smoother transition or smoother closing. But I know in Missouri, a lot of people use different title companies, and that's okay as well. So just read that verbiage there to make sure. But again, it's just they're encouraged to use the same title company. Most do not, though. But here's another important date, our closing date, 6/24. So I put 6/24 here. Now, here's another thing to keep in mind. My loan commitment date, I put 6/11, and I put my closing date 6/24. So I gave, what you'll see too, and just think of this on the seller side right now. I'm shifting gears here. If I'm the seller, and somebody sent me a contract, and let's say loan commitment said 6/22 and closing date 6/24. I don't like that at all because the buyer has up until 2 days of closing to potentially get out of the deal if they can't secure financing. So I like to have enough of a buffer in there to know that, okay, by 6/11, we have loan commitment. Everything's done. Now we're moving toward closing, and we're just waiting for closing to occur. I don't like to see loan commitment and the closing date on extremely tight if I'm representing the seller. If I'm representing the buyer, not that big of a deal because it actually protects my buyer maybe a little bit more. But if I'm representing the seller, I don't like to see that. So just keep that in mind as well. A couple weeks between loan commitment. I get if it's a 30-day closing. Typically, it's going to be about a week before. But also keep in mind, talk to your lender. Before you put these offers in, talk to your lender and see how much time they need for loan commitment. Like, don't just say, oh, they can get it done in a week. We don't know that. So make sure you're talking to the lender, whatever lender the buyer is using, to make sure you figure out how much time they need to get loan commitment. Some are slower, some are faster. It just depends. But closing date. So here's an important thing that gets hung up on a lot. We check this box closing. So it says here, the closing is the exchange of the seller's deed for the total purchase price. Seller shall be deemed to have received funds when the funds are received by seller or seller's title company. The closing of the sale shall take place on, I can't talk today, 6/24 or any other date that both parties agree in writing. Buyer will close at, insert your title company, Global Title, the title company which provides title insurance. Regardless of who closes for buyer, seller may close at the title company of seller's choice. Title will pass when the sale is closed. Seller to deliver possession of the property and keys to buyer no later than closing. So this is one that gets confused a lot. People say funded, like it has to be funded. And they think funded means their seller has to have received the funds in their checking account or in their account. That is not true. What closing is, and then some people think, well, my buyer signed and your seller signed, so we're closed, so my buyer can move into the house. The reality is the closing is the exchange of the seller's deed for the total purchase price These are important lines right here, 75 and seller 76. Seller shall be deemed to have received funds when the funds are received by the seller or the seller's title company. So seller or seller's title company. So if I go to closing at 9 a.m., right, and then seller goes to closing at 11, and my title company sends the wire to the seller's title company, and they receive the wire, we are considered closed. That is closing. So when people are like, no, it hasn't funded, my sellers don't have their money yet. They're not going to get, it's Friday at 4 p.m. and my sellers don't have the money in their account. Your buyer can't move in. They're not funded yet. Yes, they can, as long as the seller's title company has the funds. So as long as my buyer's title company sent the funds and it was received by the seller's title company, we are considered closed. It doesn't have to be in the seller's checking account or whatever account they have, bank account, to be considered funded. So just keep that in mind. That gets confused a lot by agents. They think the seller's like, well, I don't have my money yet. You're not moving in. Well, your title company has your money. They just haven't sent it to you yet. So yes, we are moving in. We are considered closed. Very important though. That's what's considered closing. Again, I'll read it again, 75 and 76. Remember these two lines. The closing is the exchange of the seller's deed for the total purchase price. Seller shall be deemed to have received funds when the funds are received by seller or seller's title company. So as long as all parties have signed, seller's title company has the money, then you are considered closed. Your buyer can move in. Now, if your buyer wants to move in ahead of time, right? If they want to move in that morning before closing, I would recommend doing a possession prior to closing. Let's say they're like, hey, I have to be in at 8 a.m. We would check that box there. But then I would say, see where it says right here on line 80, we have closing checked, which means the seller's title company has to receive funds before your buyer can legally take possession. But if you put a time there and a date, well, then essentially we have to have another document signed. Then and it just adds a little bit more confusion, because what it says there is like, let's say I put 8 a.m. of, I don't know, 6/24, but in no event prior to closing as defined above. All parties agree to sign closing documents at the time facilitates this possession. If possession is to be delivered on a day other than closing, as defined above, parties should complete the appropriate rider. That would be a possession prior to closing. So you would want to get a possession prior to closing, but let's not overcomplicate this. Check the box closing, and then make sure your title company gets the funds to the seller's title company, and then you're closed. Your buyer can move in. I always recommend buyers close earlier in the morning. I think that's important. I also recommend don't close on a Friday. So the reason I recommend never closing on a Friday is because if something happens, let's just say something happened, and things do happen, and we get to the end of the day Friday, and this thing doesn't close, and money hasn't been sent, there was some sort of glitch somewhere, something happened, and funds weren't sent to the seller's title company. Well, by law, by the contract, your buyer cannot move into the house. And now it's Friday at 5 p.m. They have a moving truck that they can't move the stuff into the house. And the whole weekend has to go by now. And now they're really angry because they can't move into a house and all their stuff's in a moving truck. Like stuff like this happens. It's happened a lot, actually. So again, never close on a Friday. I think it's extremely important. Nancy says, or Monday as well. I agree with that too. Monday too, because like people are just getting back to work on Monday. Mondays can be a little bit of a risky day, especially an 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. closing on Monday. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday would be my recommendation for closings. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Also keep in mind holidays. Look at your calendar before you pick a closing date. There are bank holidays. There are holidays where banks are closed, title companies are closed. So just make sure you're taking a look at all of that. But again, like the Friday closing, to me, I prefer never to do it. I know a lot of you can still do it, but if there is issues, now nothing can get done until Monday. Title companies closed, banks are closed, like nothing's happening over the weekend. So just keep that in mind. Hopefully that's clear. That's a big part of the contract, though, that gets misinterpreted by a lot of people. So I hope we've got some clarity around that now. So just keep that in mind. So, and then always caution to, line 88, parties are cautioned to always call to confirm instructions before sending any funds via wire. A lot of wire fraud out there now. So just be sure your title company is talking to your clients directly, getting them any information they need if they're going to send a wire. So extremely important. I would also recommend that, there's just a lot of wire fraud. So if your buyers are ever uncertain, hey, is this really from your title company? Have them just alert them ahead of time that if you receive anything, it looks strange, make sure you call me first so we can make sure it's accurate and legitimate before you send any money. Okay, let's go into the rider section. So we're not going to talk about the riders today. We'll do that on a separate training. But the rider section, so for the purposes of the example on this contract, I am checking the box appraisal rider, meaning the property has to appraise out. Again, we're not going to go deep on that. I'm checking, again, the broker compensation rider. This is one box that gets missed a lot. We check it on page 1 that the broker compensation rider is a part of the contract. A lot of agents forget to check 97, though. Make sure you check that. One other one I like to check a lot, provided this sale isn't contingent on another closing or anything like that. If it were, I would check the appropriate riders here. But I like to check the review of indentures and restrictive covenants if my client is moving into a subdivision or a house with or a home with an HOA. The reason for that is because that gives my client the ability and me to go find the HOA indentures, have them review it, and make sure they're okay with all of it prior to purchasing. And then if not, there's a time period in that rider where they could terminate the contract if they weren't satisfied with what those indentures said. Reason for that would be stuff like, let's say my client has a painting company and he's got a truck, a work truck that's going to be parked outside and it's got his branding all over it, like, Mark's Painting or whatever. Some HOAs will not allow that. They won't allow what's called a commercial vehicle to be parked outside. That could be a big problem for my client. Let's just say they had this full intention of putting up a 6-foot privacy fence. They're like, oh, we love privacy. We have to have a 6-foot privacy fence. Well, the HOA says, no, you can only have a 4-foot privacy fence, right? Stuff like that's real. So we need to know these things ahead of time and have them review those indentures to make sure that there's nothing in there that would stop them from wanting to move forward with the property. So I always check that box as well. Again, go read that rider, though. Read all of the riders that you're checking to make sure you fully understand them. Franchise disclosure, we're not a franchise. You don't have to worry about that. That's just some general verbiage. Title and survey. This one is important, though. Typically in the state of Missouri, buyer is to order and provide title. And then again, 25 days if none stated. So we put in, again, even though it's a default, I like to fill it in. That way it eliminates any questions my buyer may have. Like, hey, did you miss this? Or is it supposed to be blank? Put 25. The other thing too is, so buyer may, let's look at lines 117 and 118, 119. Buyer may, at buyer's option and expense, order a title examination and commitment to issue an owner's and or lender's policy of title insurance in the latest ALTA form, including mechanics lien coverage from the title company specified in paragraph 5. This should be ordered promptly after the contract acceptance in order to allow sufficient time to obtain and review documents. So what that means is, as soon as I get this in, my title company has 25 days. As soon as I get this offer accepted, I want to send this to my title company and my lender immediately so they can get the ball rolling, because they have 25 days to go uncover anything in any kind of mechanics liens, clouds on title, judgments, anything like that. They need to find that. And then within that 25 days, if they come back and say, hey, there's a mechanics lien on this property, we need to take this to the seller, and then the seller to the seller's agent, and then the seller's responsible for resolving that prior to closing. Essentially what title insurance is doing is it's guaranteeing that this property is being purchased free of any clouds, liens, judgments on title. They're getting it with clear title. Now, it also states here, survey. I recommend survey. We did a training, was it last year, toward the end of last year, we had a survey company come out and talk. I recommend getting surveys always. I know some people are like, hey, they're good for about 10 years, which they typically are. Title companies can use those. So if the seller had one previously done, they can use that. But again, a couple of things there. A stake survey is line 125. A stake survey is generally required in order to obtain full survey coverage in an owner's policy of title insurance. A SRPR, which a lot of people call them a spot survey, may or may not disclose all of the defects involving such matter as encroachments, overlaps, boundary lines, or acreage discrepancies. I would recommend getting a survey always, a stake survey. Even if the seller had a survey, I would still recommend getting it, because that survey is for your buyer and for the purpose of this contract. So I highly recommend getting surveys done always when buying a home. gives you exact boundary lines, make sure there's no easements, encroachments, things like that. What would be an important reason for getting a survey? Well, let's say they're going to put a pool in. All right. And we buy this property and we're like, they say, oh, we'll just get it later. We're going to do the pool next year. We'll just get a survey later. This actually did happen. I think it was a house in Whitmore. Bought the house, no survey, wanted to put a pool in, got a survey done a year later when they were wanting to put a pool in. MSD easement running through their backyard, no pool. All right. MSD could come in and rip that pool out if they needed to get to the sewer line. So stuff like that happens. All right. I actually made a mistake early on. My client, we got a spot survey when I didn't understand. It was one of the first sales I made. I didn't understand the difference. My client paid for a spot survey. A couple of weeks later after closing, they wanted to get a fence put up. So then they had to pay for a stake survey as well to get the fence put up. So just ask things like that. Hey, do you intend to put a fence up or put a pool in? Or just honestly, I would recommend getting a survey all the time. All right. That's just something I would do. So recommend surveys for everybody. We'll do another survey training here at some point, though, just to understand the importance of that. But again, basically what this paragraph is stating that there is 25 days for your title company to do a rundown on title, to find anything that might be wrong with title. We then need to get that to the seller or seller's agent. And if they cannot get this cleaned up or reach an agreement on it, contract can be terminated with earnest money to be returned to your buyer. So again, extremely important. Don't sit on this. Don't sit on this and send it to title and say, hey, we're closing next week. Here's the contract. It's been accepted 3 weeks ago. I just didn't get it to you. Send these things to your lender and title company as soon as you get them accepted. Very, very important. Time is of the essence. All right, adjustments and closing costs. Some legal verbiage here. Adjustments, charges, and closing costs are agreed to be paid by parties, subject to riders, the FHA and the VA. There's some things on there, but buyer will pay for where applicable. They're required for their insurance premiums, survey and title company. This just talks a little bit about what closing costs are. What I would also say, though, is a big one that comes up a lot. Let's look at what sellers required here. Title company charges, municipal, special tax, real estate compensation, agreed upon repairs. A big one, though, is if you buy a house with propane and there's propane still in the tank, I would talk to the seller about that ahead of time. Sometimes sellers sometimes they own that propane tank and it's not staying. So if there is a propane tank on the house, I would find out, one, is it owned or leased? And then two, sometimes they want a proration for the amount of propane still in the tank. The seller wants to get compensated for the propane in there. Other times sellers don't care. But again, that's something you want to address. Those are things I've dealt with in the past where it was like, hey, the propane tank is owned. They're taking it with them. So if we wanted that, we would have to write that in the contract for it to stay. Don't just assume it's going to stay. Very, very important. So there's some things like that are really important. Again, a lot of this is general verbiage, though, so I would recommend reading through it. But let's get to paragraph 10 here, where this is another important one, our inspections. This is another one a lot of agents don't fully understand. So 10 days is the default. So inspections within 10 days, 10 if none stated, after the acceptance deadline date. Buyer may purchase one or more written home inspections from an independent qualified inspector. Buyer, including but not limited to environmental hazards, termite, wood destroying insect infestation, so on and so forth. It does say discovery of an unsafe condition may result in an immediate shutoff by one or more appliance utilities. Let's say there's a massive gas leak. Well, then we might have to get that gas shut off right away. But here's the big thing. We get our inspections done within 10 days of the acceptance deadline date. We have 10 days. So 10 days, we get our inspections done. Let's just say we get our inspector in there day 5. We get the outcome of the inspections, and now we have 3 options. We are either 1, satisfied with the inspections, and delivery of inspection reports to seller or listing broker is not required. If seller or listing broker has not received the written inspection notice by the end of the inspection period, buyer shall be deemed to waive the satisfied with the results of any inspection. So what that means is if the 10 days runs out and we submit nothing, this inspection's waived. So the 10 days comes and goes. This is waived. We have had agents recently, not us, but a buyer on one of our listings, one of our agents' listings, that the agent just let this date pass. She never did inspections, let it pass, didn't tell anybody. And then finally, the agent calls like, hey, inspection deadline's coming up. Are you going to do inspections? Didn't call, didn't email anything. Then like after inspection deadline ended and a couple days later, she emailed and said, hey, oh yeah, they're happy. They're not going to do inspections. So I don't know why she wouldn't say that ahead of time, but whatever. Doesn't matter. But that date came and passed. So if we do decide to get inspections, though, we have three options. One, we can be satisfied and we can send that inspection notice saying we're satisfied. Two, we can terminate. So we can terminate within this time frame and say, oh my gosh, there's too much wrong. We got our inspections. There's a lot going on. We don't want the house now. We terminate and we fill that box. So on number 2 on the inspection notice, in this case, buyer shall have purchased one or more home inspection reports from an independent qualified inspector as provided for above, which together cover the substantial structural elements and systems of the property. Buyer shall provide such reports to seller or listing broker if requested by seller. Here's something I want you to think about. We've had scenarios where the seller had inspections done on their house and a buyer terminated and walked away. And the buyer sent the inspections to the seller because they requested them. And then our buyer came in, put an offer in, and the seller says, hey, we have inspections already. If you want to save some money, we'll provide them to you. My buyer says, sure, love that. Great. Buyer then gets the inspections. They get the house accepted, right? And then they get the inspections. And then they say, you know what? We want to walk away. Seller says, well, you didn't pay for any inspections. We just gave those to you. You didn't pay for anything. So contractually, you were supposed to have paid for an inspection in order to get out of the contract, right? Turns into a big mess now. So what I would recommend is that if the seller says we have inspections, get that prior to getting the offer inspected, have your client review it, and then they can choose to not accept the contract or move forward prior to being signed by all parties. But if they intend to terminate, they have to have paid for an inspection that's covers the substantial structural elements and systems of the property. That is not like a termite. Lawyers can fight this, but it gets messy. Oh, I just paid for $100 termite inspection. Is that considered substantial systems? Depends on lawyer interpretation a lot of times. So keep that in mind. If we want to terminate, we should have paid for an inspection and then we can terminate. Or third option is we're willing to close upon satisfaction of the requirements set forth in the inspection notice. If we decide we get the inspections back and we say, okay, we're going to ask for stuff, and then we send that to the seller, a new 10-day window starts. When we send that inspection notice, so let's just say hypothetically, get this house under contract, get inspections done, day 5 of our 10 days, we submit our inspection notice to the other agent, asking for items to be repaired. A second 10-day window starts now. And within that second 10-day window, which is on line 204, the parties have a total of 10 days. This is called our resolution period. This means we have to come to a full resolution within that second 10-day window in order for the contract to continue to move forward. So that means we send an item. We say, hey, we want these 5 items fixed. Seller comes back and says, we'll fix 3 of them. Buyer says, sure, that sounds good. We sign off on the inspection notice. We're good. We've now resolved the contract and it's moving forward. Now, so just keep that in mind. That is a second 10-day window known as a resolution period that starts once we submit the inspection notice. If we look here, so it says right here, 10 days, line 204. Or let's look at line 203. Buyer is willing to close upon satisfaction of requirements set forth in the inspection notice, which must be accompanied by a complete copy of the written inspection reports purchased by buyer. That's the important thing. That's why I say if they just give you inspections, it has to be purchased by buyer. The parties have a total of 10 days, if none stated, after the date of seller or listing broker's receipt of the inspections, the resolution period, to reach a written agreement as to the requirements set forth in the inspection notice, or to an agreed upon monetary adjustment, or the contract is terminated and earnest money deposit to be returned to buyer, subject to paragraph 12. During the resolution period, either a written commitment by seller to meet the requirements originally submitted by buyer in the inspection notice, or a written commitment by buyer to accept the property without such requirements shall constitute an agreement for purposes of this paragraph, even after earlier negotiation failed to produce agreement. So essentially we have to come to an agreement or not, but we have to resolve within that second 10-day window. I know it's a lot of words, but again, I always recommend reading this too, so you can really interpret. But just keep that in mind. We have 10 days to get our inspections done. If we decide to submit that we want things fixed, we have a second 10-day resolution period. All right, if you have questions on that, let me know. Home warranty. Buyer acknowledges that seller is not providing a warranty, or if they are providing a warranty, check the box that they are. Or, if you want a home warranty, what I would say here too, though, is if you're going to ask for a home warranty or the seller is offering a home warranty, make it specific, right? Don't just put, yes, check the box and leave this blank. You're going to say seller agrees to purchase on or before closing a limited warranty or service agreement to be ordered by listing broker or by you at a cost not to exceed, put the cost of the warranty in there, $850, $500, whatever it is, and further describe choice home warranty, HWA home warranty. Whatever the home warranty is, be specific and write it in there. Don't just check the box and leave this blank. That means the buyer or the seller could just give you the bare minimum warranty. So put the dollar amount and the name of the warranty company in there. Very, very important. Insurability. This is another one. Now, I learned something recently on the Missouri contracts. There's Missouri contracts and St. Louis contracts. Missouri doesn't have an insurability clause, which I found interesting. I made a mistake. Look at that. I left out my 10 days. So see, I did this in about 2 minutes, and mistakes can happen. Even though it does default to 10 days, I missed a box. That's why you double and triple check these contracts. So this contract, insurability, very important one that most agents don't understand. This contract is conditioned upon buyer's ability to obtain homeowner/hazard insurance for the property. If within 10 days, if none stated, I would recommend putting a 10 there though. After the acceptance deadline date, the insurability period, buyer does not deliver to seller or seller's broker a written notice from an insurance company of buyer's inability to obtain homeowner/hazard insurance on the property, this condition shall be deemed waived, and buyer's performance under this contract shall thereafter be conditioned upon buyer's obtaining insurance. Why is this important? Well, a couple of reasons. We have 10 days. And you know what? You may want to even put 15 days just to give you a little bit more time to protect here in your contracts. If you're not in a multiple offer, we have to be super competitive. 15 days gives you a little bit more time. But what you want to do is you want to tell your client, this is extremely important. Once we get this offer accepted, you need to call your insurance agent and let them know you're purchasing a home and get a quote for this property. Because what can happen is, let's say the house is uninsurable for some reason, or what has happened in the past to me, St. Louis City property had knob and tube wiring. Insurance company, State Farm or whatever it was, says, hey, we don't insure houses with knob and tube. There's only a handful of insurance companies that do, and maybe that insurance cost is extremely high, and now all of a sudden that messes up their monthly payment because they're factoring in a certain price quota for insurance, and now it's going to be significantly higher because there's knob and tube. And so the house maybe isn't insurable now. That's an issue. And we don't want to know about that a week before closing because their insurability contingency has already come and gone. So this is one that most agents don't understand. Let's say the roof shop, right? And the insurance company's like, nope, we're not going to insure. This roof's extremely old. We're not going to insure it. Stuff like that happens. So extremely important that you tell your clients, very important you reach out to your insurance agent right away and let them know you're buying a house so we can get a quote for homeowners insurance. So again, if there's problems where that house is uninsurable for some reason, we need to know that within that 10-day period or whatever is stated here, not after the fact. So not later. So again, very important. Very important. Make sure you do it. All right. So that's something that a lot of people don't understand. Get that done quickly. Don't wait. So a few things that are key once you get an offer accepted. Get the offer sent to your lender, get it sent to the title company, and make sure your client is reaching out to their insurance company. This is our job to stay on them to make sure they're doing this. Or maybe you have an insurance agent you work with and you can say, hey, can you give them a quote? Can you send them a quote? Again, another value-added service, really important. So very important date there. Governmental inspections and occupancy request. Another important one. More important for the seller, though, ultimately than the buyer. So governmental inspection and occupancy request. Seller agrees to immediately request any compliance inspections, including municipality, conservation, fire districts, or any other required government authority at seller's expense when such inspections are required. In the event the property and improvements do not meet such requirements or pass such inspections, seller must notify buyer in writing within 15 days, if none stated, after the acceptance deadline of any violations or requirements that seller will not correct. This is why this is important, and this is what most agents don't understand. And I actually was taught wrong on this early in my career. I was told the seller has to fix anything that might come up in a municipal inspection. They're required by contract to fix it. No, they're not. If they do their inspections within the date that's set here, and I put 15 days on line 238, if they do their inspections within that time frame, any violations that come back, they can tell the buyer what they're not going to fix. Hey, we got 10 items here. We have to put a smoke detector in every room. We have to put a handrail, this. We're not going to do any of that, right? As long as it's within that 15 days, this is a negotiation period on occupancy. It's not a requirement. Now, if the seller misses the 15 days and they do it, say, like a week before closing or 20 days after or 16 days after acceptance, then they're required to fix everything. But if they do it within their time frame, they're not. So what it says here is failure of seller to notify buyer within this period shall constitute an elimination of seller's ability to negotiate any violations or requirements of the inspections. In such event, seller agrees to comply with all requirements of the inspections prior to closing. So what that means is if the seller misses their window, and they do this after their 15 days or whatever is stated in the contract here, then they're required to fix everything. So this is something to keep in mind for your sellers as well. If you get an offer and you get 5 days, let's say the buyer agent put 5 days or 0 days, that means that their client is required to fix, or we have a short window to get the inspections done and come back with anything that's negotiable. So really, really important clause there that a lot of people don't understand. So your seller is not required, again, I'm just beating a dead horse here, but make sure it's clear. Your seller is not required to fix everything that comes back on a municipal, provided they do it within the 15-day window, right? Or whatever is stated there. So extremely important. So let's keep moving then. Questions on that, let me know. Line 255, you put number of people intended to occupy the property. Not a huge deal, but this has happened in the past where there's like 8 people going to occupy the property. The municipality won't allow that. So you need to know how many people intend. We're seeing more multi-generational type families buy homes where it's like the grandparents, the kids, and the grandkids. So just keep that in mind. There are some requirements with the municipalities on number of people occupying property. So just know how many people are going to occupy it, put it there. Another one that that gets missed a lot, if there's a sprinkler system, a lawn irrigation system on the property, there's something here that says if the property has a lawn irrigation system attached to the public water system, seller must provide to buyer documentation dated within 12 months prior to closing from a certified backflow inspector indicating that the proper backflow prevention device is installed and functioning properly. So really, really important. Really important. So irrigation system, if they have a sprinkler, let your seller know that they have to have a backflow. Usually you get these when, like I have a sprinkler system, I have a guy come out, the company comes out, opens and closes it. So you get that certification, or you can call them and say, hey, I need this. Most people, if some people are opening their own systems, they may not have that. So it has to have a certified backflow inspector indicating that the proper backflow prevention device is installed and functioning properly. Let me see a couple questions. Line 255. Do you have to put how many persons occupy property if the property does not require an occupant permit? Yeah, I would recommend filling that in, Kathy. Just put in number of people occupying. It's just good, keeps a clean contract, and that way there's no like governmental jurisdiction issues in the future. So I always recommend filling that line in if you know how many people are going to occupy. So good rule of thumb to do that. Sprinkler system, though, if the house has a sprinkler system, ask your seller. Usually on the seller's disclosure, they'll check yes. If there is one, let them know. Ask them, do you have a backflow? If you go on a listing appointment, hey, so you have a sprinkler system. Do you have a backflow within the last 12 months? Yes, we do. Fantastic. Let's get it in our file so we can provide it to the buyer agent. Very important. Also know if you have a buyer and there's a sprinkler system, the seller needs to provide that to you. So a lot of agents don't realize that. They don't read the contract. So really important. Earnest money. Some general verbiage around earnest money here. Buyer and seller agree that earnest money received by the escrow agent in connection with this contract shall be deposited within 10 banking days after the acceptance deadline date. Additional earnest money, if applicable. So this is where the little bit of a change in from what's up top there, because it does say 5 days to be turned in. This says 10 banking days. So again, get your earnest money in quickly though. Don't rely on like interpretation of the two. Just say, we put 5 days up top, get it turned in. So get your earnest money turned in. So some general verbiage around earnest money. Remedies. This talks about if either party defaults in performance of the obligation of this contract, the party claiming a default shall notify the other party in writing of the nature of default and his election of remedy. Basically what this is saying is, we know that if people default and don't do what they're supposed to do, lawyers can get involved, lawsuits can get involved. And when lawyers get involved, nobody wins. So just make sure your clients fully understand the importance of the deadlines in this contract. This is a legal instrument they're signing. It's not just, hey, I'll turn stuff in when I feel like it. Make sure they fully understand the legal consequences of signing this document. Very, very important. Loss as well. Risk of loss to the improvement of the property shall be borne by the seller until title is transferred. So until title is transferred, so the seller, house burns down day before closing, it is still the seller's responsibility. It's their house. Make sure your sellers keep insurance on the property until closing has occurred, or maybe even a day after closing, just to be safe. But this just talks about loss and what can happen if the property, something were to happen to the property prior to closing. It is still borne by the seller, meaning it's the seller's responsibility. They still own the house until title is transferred. So important there. Assignability of contract. We see this a little bit, but not a lot. But this contract is assignable by buyer, but not without the written consent of the seller. So a lot of people think, they read that it's assignable by buyer. The buyer can assign it to another borrower. Has to be written consent of the seller. Seller is taking back a note in deed of a trust and part of the purchase price. Buyer is assuming an existing note. Buyer is subject to a FinCEN reporting. Assignment does not relieve parties from their obligation under the contract. We don't see it a lot. Big knows it is assignable, but it has to be, but not without written consent of seller. So important there. The miscellaneous provision talks about time is of the essence in performance of obligation and parties. So all references to specified time shall mean central time. That's a big one as well. This one has come up before in the past. Hey, they signed East Coast. All references to specified time shall mean Central Standard Time. This contract shall be binding on or for the benefit of parties and their prospective heirs, personal representatives, so on and so forth. So again, just time is of the essence. Make sure people understand that we need to get back. We have contractual timelines in here. Very important. Federal regulations, foreign investment in real property, the FIRPTA. Get with your title company if you have foreign persons buying or selling homes. That's important. Same thing with FinCEN. We did that training. Make sure you watch that if you haven't. It's in networkglobalagents.com. There is the FinCEN training on that. Construction, words and phrases. This just talks about the construction of the contract, not necessarily the construction of the house, but listing broker is used, different terminology that's used in here. A big one here, though, is look at the bold. It says, with the exception of the term banking days as used in paragraph 12, a day is defined as a 24-hour calendar, 7 days per week. So unless it says banking, which it only says that really on the earnest money, this is considered calendar days, meaning Saturdays and Sundays. I know all of you know this, but Saturdays and Sundays count as days. So our 10 days for inspections, weekends count, holidays count, all of it. So if we get a house under contract on the 23rd and nobody's working on the 24th, 25th, and then it's like the weekend and nobody, those are all considered days. So just keep that in mind. Big one here. This is something I think is extremely important. Your final walkthrough, and it gets missed a lot. Final walkthrough. Seller agrees to permit inspections of the property by inspectors, contractors, termite inspectors, surveyors, engineers, and appraisers selected by buyer as to provide for in the contract or inspections required by buyer and lender, blah, 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 right? So buyer and broker, so it's talking about the seller has to allow your buyer to do inspections. Now, buyer and buyer's broker may also be present during these inspections, so we're allowed to go to the inspections. Seller grants buyer, buyer's broker, and any inspector whose report prompted a request for repairs the right to enter and walk through the property, and the right to have the utilities transferred to buyer within 4 days prior to closing. The purpose of the walkthrough is only for the buyer to confirm that the property is in the same condition, ordinary wear and tear expected, as it is on the date of this contract, and that the repairs are completed in a workmanlike manner. Seller will arrange at seller's expense to have the utilities turned on during the period specified for an inspection and walkthrough unless utilities have been transferred to buyer. Waiver of property and improvement inspections does not waive the right to a walkthrough prior to closing. So even if you waive inspections, you're still entitled to your walkthrough. The closing does not relieve seller or seller's obligation to complete improvements and repairs required by this contract. So what does that mean? A couple of things. One, if let's say it's a foreclosure and there's no utilities, it's this per the contract. If it were written on this residential sale contract, which most of them are written on a special sale, but if it were written on this one, seller would be responsible for making sure utilities are turned on. Why are we doing our walkthrough? Always do a walkthrough and always fill out a walkthrough notice. The walkthrough notice is a SLAR document that you have access to that most agents don't utilize, and I firmly believe in it. And I encourage you all to use a walkthrough notice. Here's what it is. You go to your walkthrough and the buyer moved out and the moving company dinged up walls. And now there's scratches going up the basement stair walls. It needs to be painted. There's drywall that's been, nudged, and things happen, right? When people move, they scratch a big floor, they pull up a rug and there's a huge stain on the floor that the rug was covering. There's stuff we didn't see at the time of, not little stuff, but if it's significant, right? We submit a final walkthrough notice asking the seller to correct these things prior to closing. So I'll give you an example. We did a walkthrough many years ago before probably didn't even know what a walkthrough notice was back then. Did a walkthrough. The carpet was just filthy, like disgusting, because it rained and the movers were moving people out while it was raining. And the carpet was filthy, right? So I called the agent. I'm like, hey, this carpet's a mess. It didn't look like this whenever we, while we were doing inspections or any of that, when we saw the house. He says, don't worry about it. I'll get it cleaned. So I took him at his word, nothing in writing. We go close on the house, and then he just never answers my calls again. So didn't get it cleaned before closing, didn't take my calls, just kind of like tough, right? So who paid for the carpet cleaning? Who do you guys think paid for the carpet cleaning? Yeah, me. So I had to have all the carpet cleaned. I easily could have not spent that, I don't know, $400 or whatever it was, 500. I can't remember how much it was back then, but if I filled out a walkthrough notice, address what's wrong, get it agreed to the seller to correct those things. And then it does say here, the closing does not relieve the seller of seller's obligation to complete improvements and repairs required by this contract. So just because we go to closing doesn't mean the seller's is now free of having to do that. Hey, you guys closed, I'm moving on. No, you agreed you're going to take care of these things and you haven't yet. Contractually, you are still liable. So I recommend the walkthrough. Always do a walkthrough and always get a walkthrough notice signed, even if everything's good. Your client walks to the house, so everything looks great. They sign off the walkthrough notice saying everything is great. It protects you. It's really important. So when is the walkthrough notice filled out? At the time of the walkthrough, within 1 to 4 days, typically of closing. Usually a day before is good. But if there was a lot of work that needed to be complete, and let's say we don't have invoices yet and things like that, I'd probably do it a day or two, a couple days before walkthrough. Generally, though, within 4 days. So what it says in the contract, buyer within 4 days prior to closing. So that's when you would fill out the walkthrough notice. If everything looks good, your buyer signs off saying everything's good. It's another document that protects you. It shows that you're doing your job. Very important. What would be the best way to document anything that the seller's agent agreed to complete? So that, Nancy, is going to be in your inspection notice typically, that they are going to, during inspections, they're going to agree. But in the walkthrough notice, let's just say for purposes of this conversation, we go do our walkthrough and they did all the repairs, everything's good, but we noticed that there's a huge scratch on the floor. Or like I had a seller many years ago where the moving company just really banged up the walls going up and down the basement stairs. So we had to fix that. So in the walkthrough notice, you would write that in there. Seller to have drywall, professionally licensed drywall contractor to skim coat or repair the drywall and paint to match, something to that effect, or come up with some form of a credit. I think we ended up giving a credit. But you would put that actually in the final walkthrough notice. There's an option to fill out things that you're asking the seller to take care of. So that would be where you would document that. Everything else is documented in your inspection notice on any agreed upon repairs. So that's what you want to make sure all of those repairs were done correctly. Make sure you get lien waivers, all of that. And so in my case, the agent was to do it. Yeah, in my case, they asked me to get, they sent me a final walkthrough notice and said, hey, and I saw it. I went over there before and I was like, I called my client and said, hey, man, the moving company really banged this stuff up. He was actually able to get a credit from the moving company. And then we gave the buyer that credit to get that stuff fixed. So, but you put that on final walkthrough notice. Really, really important. Stuff like that does happen. So always do your walkthrough. A big one too is like, they pull up carpets and stuff and the floors are really in bad shape. Like things like that can happen. So make sure you do your walkthrough notice. Floodplain, buyer may terminate this contract if any portion of the property is located in a designated 100-year floodplain unless disclosed to buyer in writing prior to contract. If terminated, earnest money to be returned to buyer. Failure by buyer to terminate within 10 days of actual knowledge of the 100-year floodplain or by closing, whichever occurs first. So most of the time you're going to know if it's in a floodplain ahead of time. If it wasn't disclosed and you find out later, you can terminate if you find out later, provided it's within 10 days of actual knowledge. Most of the time, though, you're going to know. Again, from an insurability purpose, though, let's just say for some reason they didn't disclose and a section of the backyard is in a floodplain. It wasn't disclosed. That's why you want to get your insurance quotes because they will typically find that. And now we have to get flood insurance and maybe it doesn't work anymore so your buyer can terminate. Special agreements, that's where we're putting any kind of special agreements in there. I don't know, sometimes like appraisal gap verbiage can go in there, things of that nature. Square footage, just a disclosure saying we're not an expert in measuring. So you're going to check one of three boxes on the seller's disclosure. A lot of times agents will update the seller's disclosure or upload the seller's disclosure into the MLS. Your buyer will review that ahead of time, sign it. So if that is the case, you're going to check the box that the buyer confirms before signing that they have read it. If there is no seller's disclosure yet, you would check the box saying that you essentially have 3 days to get the seller's disclosure and review it. If not, you can terminate. Or if there's no seller's disclosure provided by the seller, you're going to check box 386 stating that. Relationship and communication disclosures. We operate as designated agents. Different sellers are going to operate different, but you can look on the MLS and it'll say how licensee, if you look on the MLS for the property that you're putting an offer in, typically we'll say licensee assisting seller is a seller's agent or designated agent. So I go ahead and fill that box in for them. You can or cannot, it's up to you. But I'm going to check designated agent. And then we at NettWork Global operate as designated agents. So licensee assisting buyer is a designated agent. I check that box there. Sources of compensation. Why are both boxes checked? So why are both boxes checked on sources of compensation? The reason for this would be if I have a buyer agency agreement signed with my client and they agree to pay me 3%, and then I put an additional transaction fee on there, $300, say. So they're going to pay me additional compensation of $300 plus 3%. And then on my broker compensation rider, I ask the seller to pay me 3%, or excuse me, I don't ask, the buyer asks the seller to pay the 3% that's owed to me. Well, then the seller is paying sources of compensation, but there's still a $350 additional compensation fee that the buyer is responsible for. That's why both boxes are checked. So you might see this if you're representing a listing and you see both boxes being checked. That is the reason why, because the buyer is asking the seller to pay their 3% or 2.7 or 2.5, whatever it is on their buyer agency agreement. And there's an additional compensation fee on there that the buyer is still responsible for. That's why both boxes would be checked. So go look at the buyer agency agreement. It'll make more sense. You see that you put in, 3% or 2.7 or whatever you're charging the buyer. And if you're charging, we have some agents that charge an additional fee, additional compensation on top of that percentage. We have other agents that don't. Either way is fine. It's your business. However you see fit to operate, you can add that fee or not. But if you are adding that fee, you would want both boxes to be checked. seller and buyer, if the seller is just covering the percentage part of it. So hopefully that makes sense. Then we're going to fill out NettWork global information, broker license, your name, the offer date, your MLS ID, your license number. I like to fill in, you don't have to do this by any means, but I typically do, just makes it a little easier for the seller's agent. I fill out their information as well when I'm presenting an offer. I'm going to put my offer to be accepted by. In this scenario, I give them a little over 24 hours, saying it needs to be accepted by 5 p.m. of tomorrow. A lot of people think this is a response time. It's not. They don't have to respond by this time. So basically, if they don't get back to me tomorrow by 5 p.m., it's kind of like we don't have a valid contract. It's null and void in a lot of regards. It's not a response time. It has to be accepted by that time. And so they can come back then and agree to accept or counter or reject. And those are their options. What questions do we have? I think I missed one. That's the contract. I know that's a little boring. I get it. But I think that it's important to go through it. And I hope that helps add a little bit more. I got a question here. Where do we learn about the propane tank? And do we need to ask about this on every home? Should we expect to see this in seller disclosure? Yeah, so no. A lot of homes, like any house, many homes are going to be on gas. And so in the seller's disclosure, though, it will state whether it's on propane or gas. So that would be a good first place to look. Sometimes if you go show a property, it's more like rural type properties, maybe on land that don't have access to public gas. So they're on propane. So you're probably in St. Louis, you're not going to run into it a lot until you start getting outside of St. Louis and St. Charles County. More rural areas typically have that. But it will state it on the seller's disclosure. Yeah, if it's on natural gas or propane. So if you see propane, that's where it would be. The same thing with like septics. If it's not on public sewer and it's on septic, you need to have septic inspections done. So it's another series of inspections that are done as well. You can see all of that in the seller's disclosure because the seller should be detailing all of that it's on septic, not public sewer. What other questions do we have? Looks like, we ran well over an hour. So again, morning, love these type of trainings. Do you never know what you're missing? Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I have another agent that says, I didn't realize you had to have bought an inspection before it could be a legal document for requesting repairs. Great to know. Yeah, that's a big one that gets missed. We're just like, oh, the seller's so nice. They're giving us the inspection. It states clear as day in the contract it has to have been purchased. So that's an issue. Actually, we ran into an issue recently on that where like lawyers had to get involved in all of that. Stuff like that happens. So what I would recommend is if the seller's like, oh, don't worry, we have inspections, we'll give them to you. I would probably want to get those prior to getting my offer accepted and review them. I know timing doesn't always match with that, but it does state in order to terminate, buyer has to have purchased one or more inspections that kind of cover the complete systems of the house. So super important there. What else do we have here? Is it the obligation for the seller to have the utilities running, including water? Typically, yes. So in that contract, yes. Yes, it is the responsibility of the seller to have those utilities on during your inspections. Now, keep in mind, there is a special sale contract which eliminates inspections from the contract. It's 6 pages, 6 or 7 pages instead of 9. We'll go through that one not today, but we'll do a training on the special sale contract. If you write on a special sale contract, it takes out inspections, but you can add a special sale inspection rider, which then would ask the seller to have those utilities turned on. So typically the answer is yes. It's usually the responsibility of the seller, especially in the residential sale contract here, yes, to have those utilities turned on for inspections. I'm back to the final walkthrough. I've had deals where the seller is moving on closing day. Is there any way to protect buyers in a situation like this? Yeah, good question, Nancy. That's a tough one. That's a really tough one because stuff like that does happen. Yeah, where they're moving on the closing date. What I would recommend is trying to, as much as possible, if they're going to move on closing date, send a final walkthrough notice stating that it's contingent on viewing of the property after the client, and we'll get some verbiage put together for that. Well, I can't just spitball that off the top of my head, but something to the effect, if they are moving on closing date, I would still, one, what time are they going to be out? What time are they going to be moved out? And 2, I would want to go walk through that house again after they're moved out to make sure that it is in good condition, because we know that, it does happen. That's a tough one, right? So we'll get offline. We'll create some verbiage around that, on putting that on the walkthrough notice, that, essentially it's still contingent upon viewing of the property after the seller has moved out completely. And what I would say is, if you run into that scenario where they're moving out on the closing date, let's talk about that to figure out like how to draft a document that protects the client. So what I find is, most of the time people are moving out the day before, but you're absolutely right. It does happen where they move out same day. That does pose a problem, because they move out and they bang up the walls. They make, stuff like that does happen. So I would definitely draft a walkthrough notice with some verbiage around that. So if that does happen, if you guys are running up against that, always call me. We'll talk through it to make sure we protect your buyers. Hey, they're moving out, they're scrambling to get out the same day of closing. I'm a little bit concerned that the house might be in disarray. And so we'll talk through that. Most of the time though, I find most people move out a day before or a couple of days before. So it doesn't happen all that often, but I agree with you, Nancy, it does happen. So very important though on the walkthrough notice. Walkthrough notice is extremely important though. If you don't do it, don't rely on the agent's, verbal commitment. That was my mistake. Always document, even if it's your friend, right? Like, it be your best friend, but don't rely on like, oh, they'll take care of it, no problem. No, in a lot of instances, they don't take care of it, and then it becomes your responsibility. So my big thing on the contract is, 1, know it. I encourage everybody to go through and just read this again. Read it all. There's some very important dates though. Loan commitment, extremely important. Understanding the inspections and the inspection deadlines, very important. The insurability, very important. Get the earnest money turned in, very important. Make sure you understand the contract. And what I recommend is read it and then practice explaining the contract to your client. Like, practice that. Don't just rely on sending it the first time and saying, hey, yeah, just read it. Let me know if you have any questions. I find a lot of agents will do that. They just send it in an e-signature via .loop or DocuSign or whatever, and they don't take the time to explain it. Back in the day when I was new in the business 20 years ago, we had to typically go meet the client face-to-face. You'd have to explain it. So you really want to understand it and being able to go through and highlight the important deadlines and dates of the contract so they understand it as well. So they're not like, hey, you didn't tell me that. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know I had to get inspections done. Things of that nature. Very, very important. So I hope it was helpful. If anybody else has any questions, drop them in, or if you want to jump up here with me. Oh, it looks like, okay, cool. Yeah, there's no more questions. But yeah, if you have any questions, drop them in here. I appreciate everybody being on. I know we ran over there. I like to keep most trainings at an hour. What we're going to do is we're doing the Missouri contract next week. And then we're going to start adding in contract writer training as well, going through the appraisal rider, going through FHA rider, VA rider, going through the broker compensation rider, the different riders that I think are extremely important. I want our agents to really understand the contract because, again, as I mentioned early on when I started this, a lot of agents don't. Even agents that have been in the business don't fully understand it. And I get it. It's a lot. A lot of stuff is written by attorneys just to be complicated and confusing. So the more we can understand and interpret, the better off we will be. And it just puts us in a better position, 1, to be a more professional agent, and 2, to make sure we're protecting our clients on both the buy side and sell side. So I appreciate it. Thank you all. Appreciate you all being on. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out and we'll get some additional contract trainings lined up. So thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.